So good morning, everyone, and welcome to this webinar on turning uncertainty into opportunity with an emphasis on Australia and Australian businesses. And my colleague Scott is sharing some materials, so we trust you can all see those. My name, as I said, is Andy. I'm going to share a few words up front on who we are as an institution and who we are as individuals, and just explain how this session this morning is designed. So my colleague Scott will then introduce some technology that we're going to use today to make this as engaging and interactive as possible. So Innosight is 20 years old this year, and it was co-founded by the man on your screens, the late, great Clayton Christensen of the Harvard Business School. And Clay is best known for his research seeking to understand what causes great companies to fail, and that ultimately formed his theory of disruptive innovation. Innosight, as a result, is a consultancy, and we have a purpose to empower forward-thinking organizations to navigate disruptive change and own the future. And that's what we're talking about today, navigating disruptive change and turning uncertainty into opportunity. So next slide, please, Scott. So we're going to do this through 3 infusions of content, followed by 3 group discussions. Scott will lead the first and the third, and I will lead the second. So I am Andy Parker. I'm the lower of the 2 pictures on the screen. I'm originally from the UK. I spend my time around Asia Pacific advising large companies. And Scott is Scott Anthony. He's a senior partner here at Innosight. He was one of its first employees following time spent researching with Clay. Scott, you may know, is a prolific generator of ideas and thought leadership, many books and articles, some of which we'll be referencing today. And last year, he was recognized by the Thinkers 50 as the 9th most influential management thinker in the world, which I think makes him qualified to now introduce some of the technology we're going to be using today.
I don't know if that's actually true, Andy, but thank you very much for the kind introduction. There's a difference between thinking and doing, but we will see if we can get all the technology to work. So we're going to use 3 different things to try to keep this really discussion oriented. We purposefully kept this a more intimate size so we could in fact have a discussion. So we're going to have 3 different ways to engage. The first is using the good old chat feature on Zoom. I'm hoping that my 3-year-old Teddy does not join today's conversation. If he does, that's what he looks like. He likes looking at himself in Zoom. But just to make sure that we're used to it, why don't you go type something into the little chat window? So just your favorite innovation, just so we can make sure we all know where it is. Just a little chat discussion on the Zoom bar. I see people are beginning to type their things in. Samantha has said Uber. Asher has said Zoom. Zoom is having a moment. We've got Netflix, which of course has seen a surge in content, the iPad. Phil appreciates the iPhone, Slack, different ways for us to communicate during meetings so that we can be even more connected all of the time. Asana, that's a different one from Anita. SpaceX from Chris. Hey Chris, how you doing? Interesting technology for those of you who haven't followed it. Very disruptive way to bring things to outer space from our friend Elon Musk. We've got Xero, one of New Zealand's finest, trying to bring disruptive accounting software all around the world. All right, we've got this, that's great. So we're going to also have several times where we're having group discussions, as Andy mentioned. So when you do want to get your voice into the discussion, we, again, don't have a massively sized group, but still basic Zoom decorum. If you could use your raise hand function, that's on the participants tab. You have the ability there to go and raise your hand. And we'll be watching there, and we'll call on people who raised their hand to get your voice into the discussion. Also, feel free to type into the chat window that you'd love to participate, and Andy and I will do our best to make sure we capture all those comments. All right, the second thing we're going to do to get some of the discussion going is we're going to do some pretty simple Slido polls. So you can either hit the QR code with your phone here, or you can just go to slido.com, and the access code is AUS for Australia. And we're going to just ask a very simple warm-up question just to get a sense as to where participants are from. And you'll see, I'll make it live once we get some answers to this question. Again, slido.com. You could do this on another tab of your browser. You could do it on your mobile phone. The access code is AUS, and you've got a very simple 2-question survey that just asks the size of the business that you're from and the level of the business that you're in. And I see we've got 1 person who has cast a vote already. So I'll try and make sure we get a handful here before I show the results. So again, this is just the warm-up question just to make sure we know where the technology is. You can see the results now on your screen once I click this button. Sorry, I've got my second control computer over here, so when I look over here, I'm not digitally distracted. I'm just looking at the command center. So we've got most people coming from a large corporation, 18% from other. And then if we look at current role, we've got a nice mix, 64% senior leaders, 27% middle managers, 9% individual contributors of the people who responded. And that poll is still open, so if you want to play around with it, I'll leave it open over there as we go back to our slides and I do the third form of interaction, which is the one that we think is the most fun. So one of the things that we did once we moved into this virtual environment that we've all been in for the last few months is try to come up with creative ways to engage audiences in discussions in ways that kind of replicate things that you might do in the room. I and my colleague Bernard Coomerly and one of our clients wrote an article at the end of 2018 called Unite Your Senior Team that said one of the reasons why there's so often misalignment among leadership teams is that people just have different assumptions and different views of the world that they don't publicly state. And one way you can get those assumptions out there, we argued, is to do a physical activity that we call walk the line. The idea is very simple. You actually put a physical line of tape on the floor and you ask a question where there are extremes. And that question might be, how do you feel about the world? Very pessimistic, very optimistic. How much should we grow next year? If we stay flat, that's great, 10% growth here. And then you have people go and array themselves in the line based on their own individual perspective. It is a very powerful way to see where people stand on an issue and actually to get them to align about a particular answer to questions of the future. Now, obviously, when we're all working virtually, we can't do that, but thanks to our good friend and colleague, Asher Devang, we have come up with a virtual way to replicate that. So this is what you need to do. You need to, for this one, open up another browser window. It works much better in a browser. And go to the website walktheline.innosight.com/AUS. And let me show you on my screen what you will see. Once you go there, you will have a chance to enter your name. My name is Scott. You can pick any Lego avatar you would like, and you enter a password. The password is AUS. We're trying to keep it simple today. And then once you do that, you're going to see a little question that looks like this. What percent of your company will work from home more than 50% of the time in 2021? And you can just go and take the little ball here, and you can slide up or slide down depending on your answer. So I'm going to put in my guess for our organization. It's increments of 5 just to keep it simple. I'm going to say, what do you think, Andy? What should we say? How about we just put ourselves right in the middle and say 50%?
That's where I was going.
So then when you do this little tool here, you get to see where everybody stands on particular issues. And there's always 2 minutes of hilarity when you do this. One is just seeing different perspectives on a topic. The other is seeing the different Lego avatars that people picked. So Michelle, you picked a good one. That's then you got Phil out here all the way at 65%. You've got Anita down at 0%, which is interesting. And with this as a facilitator, and I won't do this now just because I want to get into Ronald McDonald, 40%, Australia, love it. Well, once we do some of the actual questions here, I will call on people to explain their perspectives, but I won't do that now just because I want to get into the material. But I will give you a minute just to keep playing with this. Let's see where people stand on this issue. If you have any technical issues, type it into the chat window. We actually have Asher who helped to create the tool here with us, so he can answer it, or Andy and I can answer it as well. It's interesting. I asked this question with one of our clients, which is a big global bank that's based in Europe. I asked it about a month ago, and their answers skewed much more to the right a month ago. So I don't know if timing, so they were more in the kind of 50 to 80%. And here we've got something where, we're looking at about, I don't know, probably a mean answer of about 50% with an extreme of 70%. So the curve, Australia is not Europe, of course, but the curve shifted to the left from the last time I asked this question, which is maybe just random, but maybe something interesting too. All right, I'll wait 30 more seconds. We've got a high point. Samantha is up at 70. Aside from Anita at, we've got Asher at 35. Asher, you picked a good avatar today. I like it. Okay, good. We've got a few things in the chat window that hopefully people can. We've got Joanne, who has put 50 on the chat window too. That's an acceptable way to do this. We can have one of the Innosight friends who are with us go and act on your behalf. That's good too. All right, good. So let us go now 100%. I have to see who did the 100%. Sherry. Well, again, we'll have discussions in just a bit. We're just doing the technological run now. So let me now get into the actual content. The Walk the Line tool has worked. We've got our Slido polls working. We are ready to actually get into the meat of the material. So as Andy said, we're going to do 3 discussions. I'm going to do the first and third, and Andy's going to do the second one, a little bit of content, and then some poll influence discussion topics for the group. So first, big event disruptions and implications for Australia. So, I think one of the things that's important to remember when we get into this discussion is history speaks very clearly. When there is some kind of big event disruption, the global pandemic that we're going through now, the economic recession that inevitably comes as an aftershock, or the global financial crisis a decade ago, or SARS a few years before that, or the September 11th terrorist attacks, or. Every time something like this happens, there are opportunities to innovate and grow. If you go back to the global financial crisis, these are 2 sets of analyses, one by Gartner, one by Bain, that shows the organizations that take the right actions in the midst of tough times have the opportunity to create substantial separation between them and some of their peers. So the opportunities, no doubt, are there. One of the first things that we did as COVID-19 began to become clear that this is going to be a big event disruption is take a step back and look at what we thought it would mean for some of the trends that we have seen affecting industries around the globe. As Andy mentioned, we are a strategy consulting company. Our specialty is helping organizations imagine, design, and create the future so they can navigate disruptive change. Quite naturally, when we start working with a client, one of the first things we do is just go and canvas to say, what are the trends that we see that will change your future environment, that will require you changing your strategy? And through the work that we've done over the past few years, we've collated a database of about 300 trends. So we had a team go and look at those trends to say, which of these trends do we think have been most impacted by COVID-19? The specific thing that we were trying to figure out is where do we see signs that COVID-19 has either catalyzed a trend, that is, the trend was happening, but it's going to happen faster, it's going to happen deeper, or COVID-19 has dislocated the trend, meaning we no longer expect it to have the impact that we thought it was going to have. Then the other question is, what duration do we think this dislocation or catalyzation will take? Is it something that will be temporal, or is it something that we really think will stick? As we sifted through all of this, there were 20 trends that really jumped out to us as ones that we thought would have material impact that clustered in 3 broad areas. The first one I don't think is a big surprise. It is accelerated digital migration. This is something that was happening already. Andy and I did consulting work for a big Australian university last year, and we said by 2030, maybe by 2025, online education is going to be the norm. It turns out, of course, that was correct, but it was 2020, need 2021, where that answer is going to be the norm. So this, again, was happening already, but it's happening faster, it's happening more furiously because COVID-19 has allowed us to run a mass experiment that shows us that many digital solutions work extremely well. The second thing that we see is an acceleration of the transformation of healthcare. We see it happening broader, we see it happening deeper. Again, this was happening already. There were global forces that were pushing for transformation of healthcare, moving it from centralized locations to decentralized locations, using new technologies like telemedicine to enable people to consume care in different points of location, moving from treatment to prevention, all things that were in process, but COVID-19 we think is going to deepen and widen that transformation. Finally, the one that I think is the most interesting to watch, and the one where you can see we have less certainty about the degree to which the changes will last, is socioeconomic fragmentation. You probably have seen the estimates that suggest somewhere between 100 million to 1 billion people are going to be pulled back into poverty because of COVID-19. There's a lot of talk about people changing their supply chains and finding ways to localize things at a deeper level. Whether or not that ultimately ends up sticking depends on things that we don't know right now, depends on macroeconomic forces, the pace of vaccine development, and so on, but certainly something that is worth watching in many different industries. So those are the three broad things that we see changing because of COVID-19. The question that we would now like to ask to you back on Slido is, of these three catalyzed meta trends, what do you think will have the biggest impact on your organization? So let me go back over to screen 2 and open up poll 2. You again can use the QR code. You can go to slido.com, and I will go back to the Slido screen over here. And once we get double-digit votes, I need one more person to crack double digits. I'll show what the results are on the screen. All right, so this is interestingly a little different than I've seen in other global audiences to which I've asked this question. So when I asked this question globally, accelerated digital migration, no surprise, is the #1 answer because it really affects just about every industry to some degree. So I usually get that about 60 to 70%. So that's pretty consistent, a little bit higher here, but not radically different. Interestingly, and that's again, could just be a function of the population here, the more comprehensive healthcare transformation usually comes in #2, usually at around 20%, and the increased socioeconomic fragmentation at about 10%. So the group here has now been influenced by me saying that and has given another answer for more comprehensive healthcare transformation. But that's interesting to see that those two are a little bit closer together. Okay, great. Would love to just now spend a minute talking about this, and we can do this without the slides on so you can see our faces a little bit bigger, and if you want to flip your video on so we can see you, that would be great too. But we would love to hear from you. What sorts of things do you see going on in your industry? What's looking different because of COVID-19? So again, raise your hand just so we can see who wants to participate or type a thought into the chat window. I see some friends here. Hello, friends. Michelle looks like Kristen Blake today. That's I'm going to use my power to rename you because that's the name of our colleague that allowed you to get in here. But
Well, I can see Natalie's got her hand raised. So Natalie, you can either unmute yourself or I can unmute you. There we go.
Hi, Andy. Hi, Scott. Good to see you both. Natalie Collins from Coca-Cola Amatil. Yeah, look, absolutely digital acceleration is the one that we're seeing play a big part in our business and also in our customers' businesses. You know, especially desire for consumers to be contactless. So, you know, think about digital ordering, both when you're at home and when you're in an outlet. So we're seeing, rather than it being, you know, face-to-face or even via some hardware, a tablet or a kiosk, we're now looking at QR codes so that you can order via your own device. So it's been a big shift that we've been focusing on. And then also, you know, that last mile delivery, which you just spoke about there, Scott, in a B2C world, but also in a B2B world. So, you know, consumers and customers or retailers are looking for deliveries, you know, tomorrow, not necessarily tomorrow, but in the next couple of hours. And so we're seeing a lot of solutions coming out of the woodwork. So whether it be, you know, crowdsourced delivery models or the tech that layers on top of that, that can give the receiver of those goods that Uber or Domino's-like experience and know where their delivery is at any point in time.
awesome. So you see a lot of things, again, all things that arguably were happening already, but now you have consumers who have experienced magic in so many places that they just don't want to go back to something different, and customers too. So we then need, if we're in a business like Amatil's, we have to think about how do we continue to deliver against that, because that's just what people are going to want going forward. And that's something that we often will see people ask the question, which of the changes that happen in environments like this will stick? One of the things that you can bet on is when people are forced to experiment with something different and they find that different is better, that will stick. If they find that different is worse, it won't. So as an example, something like this, we are able to do reasonably well over Zoom. People don't have to travel. It's not the same as us all being in the room, but we're able to start, stop like this, no friction in doing it. There'll be more of this in the future. As I watched my 4 kids do distance learning over the last few months, the second the schools opened back up in Singapore, they were first in line to go there. As good as virtual learning was, as much as the schools tried for it to be good, it wasn't. And it just did not replicate the in-class experience. So people then immediately went back to physical because it was so much better. So that's at least one thing you have in your mind about, will it stick, will it not? Does it really deliver against the job? I think, Michelle, you had your hand up too about some of the changes that you see going on in legal services. So we'd love to hear from you too.
Hi, Scott. Hi, Andy. Good to see you. Michelle Money from King & Wood Melisons. For me, the big shift, and for any of you that have been watching probably legislation, will see huge push around the acceptance of digital signatures. That's a really big deal, because the way deals are executed, documents are managed, the way acquisitions occur, nearly everything we do, securitizations, funding, so many elements of businesses that are linked to getting a physical ink signature, and the process around that, and the process that lawyers have around that is shifting and will shift. And anyone who has a voice is lobbying legislation to get that to a digital signature, which will profoundly change the way we do things, that last mile, how documents are managed. So significant impact.
That's great, Michelle. One of the other things we look to see, is a temporary change going to stick? We say, what barriers either get put in place or get removed because of a big event? So as a very simple example, after the 2001 terrorist attacks, all of a sudden airport security changed, right? And that was a permanent change that has lasted for 20 years. So sometimes new barriers get put in place. Hospitals are going to change. Increasingly, people are going to say, we don't want to create hotspots where contagion spread. So telemedicine is going to really take off even more. Sometimes you get barriers obliterated, just like you see here. We have got to figure out how to sign contracts without being in the same place. It turns out that virtual digital signatures are okay. So this is something that is going to change the way that we think about doing deals in the future. I see two other hands up, so let's get these two comments. I've got Jacinta and Samantha. That's alphabetical order, first name at least. So Jacinta, why don't you go first, and then we'll get Samantha after that.
Yeah, we're just working with businesses to try and help them. Well, one of the biggest barriers that we're seeing is that businesses are actually opening, we kept being COVID compliant, as opposed to opening to be trading successfully with COVID compliance in mind. So they are just simply opening their doors, putting the crosses on the ground, and hoping to goodness that people come back and behave as normal. Whereas with the various different shifts that have come about, and with the COVID compliance comes law, and with law comes, further compliance, and then comes mitigation. So to try and move businesses understanding from, okay, I can open and put the crosses on the floor, but I've halved the capacity of my business, and I've then halved the capacity of my earnings, but I'm not taking any information in with actually changing my business model and the way in which I deliver that business to not only become more successful, or as successful as what I was prior to the COVID compliance, but also then protecting the business and de-risking not just the business as a whole, but actually every single one of their product lines, to understand, hang on, I need to mothball that particular one. But at this point, this is the baseline that I'll be able to bring that product line back in. So it's really complex just to work through cross industry. And so I've kind of got to the point now where I'm working with industries instead of business, because the industry is actually complex.
No, very complex sorts of things. And I think that the thing I really reacted to as you described it, you have a choice. Either you kind of put crosses on the ground and hope it goes back to the way it was, or you recognize that the world has changed and you need to therefore rethink your business and operating model. And I think you heard from Natalie and Michelle examples in two very different industries of changes that will stick. And if you think of and get ahead of those changes, it can be an opportunity. If you try to cling to yesterday, that's a challenge anytime there's any disruptive change taking place. All right, let's get Samantha's voice in, and then I want to go on to the next topic, just conscious of time. But so Samantha, you get the last word for this one.
It's a quick one too, Scott. Samantha here from IMC. We do learning design and seeing a real shift towards the learning content that we're producing being more like a mobile app experience, more like a digital experience, rather than just some sort of learning module that hangs out in the side of your business. This is becoming more of, it needs to look and feel like the day-to-day experience that people are having, with that learning element in behind supporting it as almost a secondary piece. Yeah.
Great. So again, something that you say that what is going on now is forcing us to up our innovation game, forcing us to meet the customer where they are so we can deliver great learning experiences to them. All right, very good. So let me go back and just give you the next little dose of content in this area. Then I'm going to have a walk the line poll, and then we will be done with this section. So in the middle of the global financial crisis, this came out in 2009, I wrote this book, an innovation playbook for uncertain times. I called it the silver lining for two reasons. The first reason is many of the things that we advised innovators to do when times are tough, prune their innovation portfolio, really understand the customer deeply, because you can't do more with less unless you know what more means, find ways to run smart experiments, find ways to share the innovation load. Many of the things you have to do when times are tough are the things that you should be doing already. So the hidden boon for innovation is tough times force good behaviors. The other reason we called it the silver lining is, again, you look back at history and you see very clearly that there are opportunities to innovate and grow. It's a chance for companies to make big, bold moves to outdistance competitors. Shantanu Narayan took over as CEO of Adobe at the end of 2007, right as the global financial crisis is beginning. Adobe at the time was a stagnating business. That would seem to be its death now. But Narayan and his team did two bold things. Number one, they reinvented the existing business, moving from packaged software to software as a service. The first experiment of Photoshop Express was run in 2008. Today, it is an entirely software as a service business. Number two, they began to get into new businesses, marketing services and analytics. 2009, they purchased Omniture. The price was about 40% less than it would have been before the crisis. Had they moved even faster, they could have gotten an even better deal. But that was something that really allowed Adobe to begin to start what we call a dual transformation that resulted in a beautiful decade of growth. Between 2009 and 2019, revenues tripled and the stock price went up 29% a year. So there are always opportunities for organizations to do this. There's opportunities to innovate as well. One pattern that we have seen persistently in the midst of big events is there's a particular type of company that does well. It's what we call an on-the-brink disruptor. So it follows the classic pattern of disruptive innovation. Take the complicated, make it simple. Take the expensive, make it affordable. It's got some success, so the crisis won't kill it, but it hasn't broken through yet. So it's less than $1 billion in revenue. Back in 2009, these are some of the companies that fit that pattern: Alibaba, LinkedIn, Facebook. Now, you might say, well, that's obvious, but in 2009, it wasn't. People were questioning what was going to happen to these companies, and obviously, it was a great time for them. We went and looked at all the companies in the world that seem to have some disruptive flair to them that fit this pattern, and these are the 18 that we're watching very closely. You can imagine some of these things. You have people who are in the payment space like Paytm. You've got people like Peloton that have distributed exercise equipment for everybody who is staying at home. You've got new financial service providers like Square Capital, Grab Financial, and then some education providers like Duolingo. So things that you can kind of imagine are well positioned to do well in the midst of the crisis. There are also opportunities for startup companies to reverb off the disruption that's affecting markets. So if you go back to the global financial crisis, it is when asset sharing platforms like Airbnb and Uber were born, and new financial providers like Square and Stripe were born. The global financial crisis led people to be a little bit more skittish about ownership and distrust traditional financial institutions. Similarly, there will be people to echo off the COVID-19 disruption and create great companies. And big companies can innovate too. Back in 1957, the world was in the grips of a pandemic, the Asian flu. It started in China, spread to Singapore, spread to the United States. Somewhere between 1 to 4 million people died because of the Asian flu. Right in the middle of that, Sony introduced the first transistor radio to the United States. A perfect time to introduce a simple, affordable product that allowed more people to consume music without having to gather centrally. This is the beginning of the modern electronics era, and it started in the middle of a pandemic. We're going to see the exact sorts of things happen today as well. How do you actually go and do this? Well, I, with one of my colleagues, wrote a paper that argued leaders have to grapple with 3 strategic imperatives today simultaneously. They have to make sure they preserve the present, build in as much flexibility as they can. They have to, in parallel, develop a rapid response strategy that looks for the inevitable rebound, whenever that might be. And number three, they have to continue to keep an eye on the horizon and think about how they're going to own the future. And these things have to be together, because as you think about the future, you have to think, just like Narayan and his team did at Adobe, what are near-term curve-bending activities that we can do that can allow us to create distance between us and our competitors? So now I want to go back to the walk the line tool. What we're going to do here is a little thing called a gold coin exercise. Those three strategic imperatives that I mentioned, I'm curious to see how your leaders are splitting their time between those three imperatives. So you should, when you go back to your walk the line screen, you should now see something that looks like this, where you have 100 coins that you can allocate between these three imperatives: preserving the present, developing a rapid response strategy, and owning the future. And you can then say, okay, our organization, we've got pretty much, this is all taken care of. So we still have 10% of time now. We're really thinking a lot about what things are going to look like when we inevitably get back to whatever new normal looks like. And then we've got 30% of our time looking at more distant future things. So that would be one example of how you could split up your 100 coins, but you could do it however you'd like. So I would love to see what people have to say about where their leaders are spending their time. And these will be the aggregate gold coins that we see. This is actually the first use, Asher, I think, publicly, I think this is true, of this particular approach. And then I'm going to get a few voices in based on what I see here. So right now we've got the vast majority on developing rapid response strategy, but a good number of people who are spending time thinking about owning the future, including a high point of Samantha up at, no, Justin up at 50% of his organization's time thinking about owning the future. We now have a little bit more of a balance that has come, but let me start here. So some of the people who've got 40 plus here, so I've got Michelle 35, Samantha 40, Anita 40, Justin 50. Would love to hear from one of you. You know, Justin in particular, 50 coins on owning the future. That's a pretty big number. Can you share with the group a little bit more about what your organization is and what it's doing?
Yeah, sure. I hope you can hear me, Scott. I also work with Michelle Marnie in the same business, and the area that I'm working in is looking at this project. So looking at what we're doing and, you know, the coming, not just rapid response, but how we're transforming over the coming years. So I think that's why I put so many coins into that one bucket, because that's the place that I'm spending most of my time looking at, you know, transforming legal services.
Awesome. And of course, legal services is an industry like all industries. It's going through a lot of digital transformation. So it's good to be thinking about the future, which will be a lot different than the past. Christopher has asked a question here, what is ideal? I don't think there is an ideal answer. I think it really depends on your industry circumstance. So for example, if you are a pure play cruise ship operator, you probably are spending all of your time thinking about how the heck are you going to survive still. But if you're in an industry that it happens that you've gotten a boost in demand, like we have a friend locally who runs the international arm of Dole, and their big business is selling tinned pineapples. And it turns out people really want to buy tinned pineapples in a pandemic. So a business that was slowly declining all of a sudden is growing. So this is a great moment for him because he now has freedom to think about the future, which he didn't think he had before. So it really depends on the context. Let's go and look at some of the rapid response answers here. And I see we've got, let's see, we've got some 60s, some 50s. Very good. And then in good order, we should look at people who are focused on the present. Natalie, I'm interested, just if you don't mind, I'll call on you again. You opened, but we'll have you round out this section. So 75%, so still a lot of time focused on dealing with the myriad operating complexities, I imagine, that you have to go through at a time like this. Say a little bit more.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, I think just in the last couple of months, there's been a necessity for everyone at a leadership level to really just focus on getting through the next 6 months. So I think we've probably swayed back a little bit from where we may have been before. And there's still, you know, people that are focused on the future. I'm lucky to be in the part of the business that gets to do that. But yeah, I think just navigating those next 6 months and making sure that you know, we can get through to the end of that is definitely where our business is spending its time at the moment.
Very understandable. You know, one of the other thoughts I had back to the question about what's ideal, one of the things that we do think is ideal is even if you're in a situation where it's 75 to 85% in preserve the present, there's at least a coin, at least an eye, at least a thought about owning the future. And the reason why that's important is every present decision you make has future implications. So your choice is either you consciously have the future in mind so that you make sure that you're moving towards the future you want to create, or unconsciously you're prioritizing the present and even the past. And if you do that, sometimes you wake up 18 months later in a very different crisis of your own making, because you've made decisions that actually make it harder for you to ultimately create the future that you want. So ideally, even in really tough times, you've got at least a coin in each of these areas so you can find those points of connection. Okay, I think with that, Andy, I'm going to call this a successful walk the line and turn it over to you for our second discussion topic.
Thank you. That was great. So the second section this morning is really to return to some research that we completed exactly a year ago, examining publicly listed Australian businesses that have consistently delivered exceptional performance through transformation. And Scott's going to change the slides for me, so there's going to be some telepathy involved in this. To give you a sense of that performance, we identified eight Australian companies, and they collectively delivered 7 times the returns of the ASX 200 over a period of 5 years, 2013 to 2018. And they did that by both transforming their core businesses for resilience while simultaneously pursuing new growth opportunities based on capabilities that create advantages. And the next slide introduces those 8 companies on the screen. I'm not going to go through them. Their stories are covered in some detail in our 2019 report that's available on our website, or please contact Scott and I if you would like to get hold of that. But what I will say is they are notably quite diverse. They range in age from 160 years old to 22 years old. Their revenues range from 20 billion to just under $1 billion. They're a mix of product and services businesses. But what connects all of these companies is a successful track record of transformative growth until earlier this year when this happened. So the COVID-19 pandemic, or coronavirus, in the first known case in Australia was January 25th. By March 20th, the borders were closed, and on March 21st, social distancing imposed. A few days later, Scott Morrison spoke to the nation, and there he is. And I said to Scott, I'm sure he didn't look this happy as he said these words, but this is the good picture I found. He spoke of an unprecedented and unimaginable battle on 2 fronts, the health front and the economic front, for at least another 6 months. And here we are, 3 months later, almost to the day, and that prediction is holding. On the health battle front, Australia made notable progress, flattening the curve, but further outbreaks obviously remain an evident risk. That's evident to see with army troops being deployed in Melbourne this week to respond to 9 or 10 days of double-digit cases. But moving to the economic battlefront on the next slide, here it's more stark. Despite significant recovery recently, the ASX remains around 10 to 12% down this year and for the last trailing 12 months, which in comparison with a bunch of global indices around the world puts it alongside the EU as a bottom performer. Now, there are obvious reasons for this and the role of dividends, what they mean for valuation of Australian stocks. But broadly speaking, the period of uncertainty and volatility is very evident here in Australia. And it led us to wonder, how are our 8 transformation champions navigating this uncertainty? How is their track record of transformation making them more resilient? Are they in turn creating and seizing opportunities? And if they are, what can we learn from those efforts? So I'm going to give you a quick snapshot of that. And firstly, we're going to talk about transformation building resilience. And the first thing to say is 2 of those champions are on the economic front line in the battle, the national carrier Qantas and travel services aggregator Webcast. And I should say here that all this financial data was based on the close of last week. We republished the follow-up report Tuesday, and I kind of just knew something major would happen. And obviously yesterday, lo and behold, Qantas sacked 6,000 people, said it needs $2 billion to ensure liquidity, having already said it would not need any more. And you know, life comes at you fast in a global pandemic, and I think that serves as a warning to all of us that this uncertainty is with us for a long time, and it will be probably years before Qantas is back to its pre-COVID levels of activity and value creation. Yet Qantas is stacking up well. You know, you look at its global peers, people like Delta, Lufthansa, Air New Zealand, and it's actually performing better than them with its share price. And you know, part of the reason for that is probably the trouble its major rival Virgin is having, which this morning appears to have sold itself to Bain Capital. But there is another reason, and that reason is that Qantas is not just dependent on airfares. It has built a thriving loyalty business, generates half its profits selling points to partner businesses to offer to their customers. So if a retailer is having a boom for its e-commerce channels at the moment, they can still reward their customers with Qantas miles, which in turn is creating some resilience. And Alan Joyce, you know, noted this morning that a lot of people wanted to provide that $2 billion that Qantas asked for yesterday. So, you know, people love a bargain, but there's a reason for that, you know, why they believe Qantas can turn this around. The next one is Webjet, and I will be very brief with Webjet, because you're probably wondering, why are they on here? Their performance, you know, that doesn't look like resilience to us. Well, Webjet nearly didn't survive. They don't have the global exposure Expedia and others have. They were in massive trouble. But there was such a willingness to invest when they when they raised funding that they ultimately returned cash. Why? Because that company and that leadership team have proven they can transform and innovate. A few years back, they created a wholesale hotel room business, Webbeds, that was so successful, it was already 50% of their business when the pandemic hit. So it's still a travel-related business. No, you know, if people aren't flying, they're also not staying in hotels. But that track record and that ability to transform and create growth, investors think they can do it again, and they put their cash in. And the third example, REA Group, the property platform, you know, property investing and speculation is something of a national pastime in Australia. But the pandemic has seen a huge reduction in viewings, lettings, house purchases, etc. But you know, despite speculation as to what that's going to ultimately play out in terms of the impact on the property market, investors have kept faith with REA Group. And again, that's due to its track record of releasing innovative features that create stickiness with property agents and property seekers. Back in 2016, REA Group launched virtual reality property viewing. They moved very quickly to supplement this in the early months of the pandemic with a new innovation called Pay on Sale, that effectively said to agents, you only have to pay for your listing, which are usually worth thousands of dollars if someone actually buys that property. So their track record of innovative features and stickiness is what helped them prove resilient. So Scott, next slide. If big events create tough environments and that requires resilience, what about turning uncertainty into opportunity? Here are two examples of businesses innovating digital offerings. We've already heard from one of them with Phil, and I'll touch on that in a second. They're primed, both of them, to ride the trend that Scott outlined earlier around that COVID is accelerating the digitalization of life. The first is Seek, the employment platform. Seek's share price is unchanged through all of this, unlike its global and domestic peers, people like Page and Hayes. You know, there is a massive unemployed people in Australia right now looking for a massively shrinking number of jobs. So while that's not net good for business or for anyone really, it does mean that Seek's investments that it's made to re-platform around AI algorithms that actually match the right candidate to the right job, you know, that's going to pay an effective pandemic dividend to them right now. But beyond that, and most transformatively, Seek have in the last few years entered the education space, the online education space, to essentially offer end-to-end services around your career and reskilling you and upskilling you for that career. And the demand for short online courses is exploding, as you might imagine. People, you know, who want to get back into the workplace are looking at new skills or improving their current skills. So that now looks like a highly prescient move for new growth, and one that I think the incumbent universities need to be worried about. And the second example I'll get into here is Aristocrat, and we just heard from Phil. Aristocrat made big moves out of the last big event, the 2008 global financial crisis, by transforming beyond their casino-based gaming machines and into social and digital gaming, as Phil mentioned, which today I think he said is about 60% of the business, or 2/3 of the business. that's positioned Aristocrat for opportunities, given the number of people migrating to digital forms of entertainment. So again, another highly prescient move. And without a social and digital gaming portfolio, I think it's reasonable to say Aristocrat would be facing maybe not an existential threat, but certainly some extreme challenges. But actually now it has an opportunity to win new users and drive growth. So moving to the next slide, let me wrap up here with this burst of content. A year ago, in the research report we published in last June, we said these 5 things. These are the 5 things that these champions have done. And we gave evidence and stories for each, which you can obviously spend more time reading after this webinar. But we said, okay, what have we learned from re-examining them 1 year later in the midst of the pandemic? And Scott, if you hit the button, we really said, okay, there's 4 things we can say about these firms that they've done to either remain resilient or to turn uncertainty into opportunity. The first is they start transformation when times are good. That doesn't mean there wasn't a clear reason or a threat they had to respond to, but it means they didn't wait until it was too late, until there was no choice or no chance of success. The second, and I think actually all 8 of these organizations, you can reasonably present that as evidence for this. The second is avoiding the pressure to play it safe. So for example, if we look at Seek, they moved into China before they were even profitable. So they were used to not playing it safe and taking a risk. They replatformed their entire business around AI algorithms to fend off well-funded global entrants like Indeed. But they didn't just stop there and declare victory. They said, no, our bigger vision is to connect learning to employment. We're going to get into online education. The third is a record of bold moves during a downturn or during a big event disruption. Coming back to Aristocrat again, the moves that they made during the last big event, the global financial crisis, to get into digital and social gaming, that's now paying a pandemic premium to them and opening up a whole bunch of growth opportunities. And lastly, they regularly apply a growth mindset. They remain curious in their day-to-day approaches and operations. And this is bringing us back to REA Group. Scott and I were fortunate enough to visit them in Melbourne last year, and their office is just full of agile teams creating new ideas or coming up with new ideas and turning them into features and functions that create stickiness with property agents. And they demonstrated that here by rapidly deploying that innovation I mentioned earlier, pay on sale. So that was a fly through of the content of looking back at our Australian champions 1 year later in the midst of COVID. The next slide is going to take us back to Slido. So what we're interested in hearing this time, if you go back to Slido, is which of these 4 lessons that I just outlined, which one is most applicable to your business? And then we'll use that to have a little bit of a group discussion. So someone in the meantime is asking how we can read the research. So both of the articles, the one a year ago, the original research, and the article republished again on Tuesday, looking at them through COVID, they're both available on our website. And Chris will make sure, Christopher will make sure we send you a link to that after this. But it's innosight.com.
Andy, we've got a neck and neck battle that I'm trying to avoid introducing bias. We've had 18 and 17 votes to the first 2 polls. We've got 8 at the moment to this one. So I'm trying to gamefully wait until we have 10 until I reveal the results. It is a 50-50 battle.
I am on the edge of my seat.
And again,
exciting. If anyone feels passionately about speaking, please raise your hand and we'll come to you.
All right, we haven't gotten to 10. I was hoping that I could nudge people who might have gotten slightly digitally distracted away from their Slido, but okay, we've got up to 10 now. Awesome. So I made the results live.
Okay, that's good, and that's very much, I think, in line with what I was expecting to see. I think that it's hard to argue that all organizations, no matter whether we're in the growth boom times of 2019 or in the middle of a pandemic in 2020, that applying a growth mindset and focusing on those customers, being curious about finding better and new ways to serve them is ultimately never going to be something that you shouldn't be doing. It's a lot of last minute changes. I think the other one, start transformation when times are good. it's very easy to say that, but you know, in every business, there's always some near-term pressure, even in the good times, even if it's how do we maximize the opportunity. But having that dual discipline to focus on today and deliver the numbers, but also thinking about what is the world going to look 5-10 years time, and is the current portfolio that we have going to deliver growth in that environment? Having that discipline to do both is ultimately one of the greatest leadership challenges that there are. So again, I think that, yeah, this is largely how I expected it. So Jacinta, I see that you've raised your hand, so I'd love to hear from you.
Hi, Jacinta from The Fifth Element. We're actually a digital transformation company, and we've been working with businesses for the last couple of years, trying to actually get them understanding that they actually need to transform now, and if they don't transform digitally across the 7 pillars of their business, the catastrophic effects that can happen. And we always had June 2020 in our head of, you know, where the catalytic of event of actually a tip between natural attrition of organic customers would drop off, and businesses would really start to realise that digital transformation was now becoming something that they had to do. Some of the tools that we've been using over the past couple of years have been the digital transformation, the global digital transformation model, but here in Australia, we've been using the one that was actually finessed by Deloitte. And Deloitte also had a secondary piece of research that was short fuse, big bang. Fuse being the length of time, bang being the digital pressure on businesses to transform, and if they didn't transform, what digital Darwinism would actually look like. And we always use, obviously, the Kodak moments and the blockbuster moments to push that forward for people to understand that incumbents can fall. And so, but one thing that we've noticed, which really hit me quite hard at the very beginning with COVID-19, the impact, was that with this short fuse, big bang concept, it was moving across industry, and the next lot of industries to be impacted was, you know, things like education and health. However, that was like 3 years out. So that got squashed into the now. So they got disrupted immediately, but also it sent back to personal transport and transportation and accommodation and tourism. And it re-disrupted what has actually already been disrupted quite significantly. So really this whole digital transformation literally had to get thrown out the window, and we had to reinvent it very quickly against all of the national research that Deloitte had done. So I found that to be really interesting. Even those who were safe, manufacturing that was going to be disrupted in the next 12 months, but at a really low percentage, so about 15% disruption, you know, it suddenly got disrupted at around about 50% pressure, and in a completely different manner. So I think there's a whole heap of learnings that we've learnt over the last few years, or since 2017 when this really became quite popular, that we've had to rethink everything, but the fundamentals have always been the same, which is great.
Yeah, and that exactly gets to the point about Scott was mentioning earlier. We spent time last year advising one of the big Victorian universities, and you know, we had a reasonable debate about whether 2030 was the right year to think about for online education to really have established itself. But you know, it's come forward, it's accelerated, and I remember speaking to the chief marketing officer of that university in the middle of this in February or March, and he said, you know, I've been having this debate with the leadership team for years about the threats that I see around more consumer-centric technology companies coming in with online offerings, and you know, locally and overseas, and basically COVID drove digital disruption to conclusion in 2 weeks. The government said every university has to provide online short courses to reskill Australia, and we're going to fund the large majority of that. And you know, the words he used was, you know, it might not be pretty, but it's online. You know, everyone's done it, and so. You know, you kind of just think, wow, that 6 months ago we stood in the boardroom with that university having a debate about how fast they needed to move. And now that debate's over, and it's actually about going back and retrofitting, you know, were we truly strategic about the way we did this? There's something that they've been ruminating on for years and ended up executing in weeks. So I do think that a lot of universities well, a lot of companies will be going back and rethinking what they've just done in the last 3 months, and saying, did we do that as strategically as we could? And if you apply some of the lessons that we've seen from this research, then if you live or take the approaches that we've outlined, then I think that you are better prepared for these events. So thank you for sharing that, Jacinta. Is there anyone else? I don't see any raised hands, but is there anyone else that would like to make a comment or share some of the lessons that they think apply to their business or organization? Natalie, I see your hand's just gone up again.
Yeah, look, happy to contribute. Look, I think out of those four, starting transformation when times are good, I can certainly see has paid benefits for us. So what I didn't share is I work for our corporate venturing arm, which we've been running that now for about 2 years. And so we started that obviously, before this pandemic, and have spent the last 2 years, building our credentials and our understanding, our network. And that's put us in a really good position going into COVID to be able to find those solutions that I talked about earlier. So, digital ordering platforms, last mile logistics, all sorts of e-commerce platforms that our business has been calling out for, not before COVID, but certainly as we've headed into COVID, they've really needed that for our business and for our customers. So starting to engage in that space and building out that network has meant that when times are tough, coming into this period of history has meant that we've been really well positioned to find the solutions and the innovations that we've needed to help our business and our customers succeed.
Yeah, no, I think it's a great example what you're doing at Amateur X, and obviously we've had conversations around where the focus should be in 2020, and I think that you guys are appropriately. If you go back to working through preserving the present, you are appropriately putting some attention there right now. But that doesn't mean that you guys aren't thinking about what innovations you need to invest in 5 years. So I think it's a great example. Thank you for sharing. I don't see any other hands up, and I'm conscious that we are exactly at time to get into the third conversation, which is a minor miracle, but I'm pretty pleased with that. So thank you for that, and Scott, back to you.
Yeah, I don't know exactly any session that has been exactly to time. That's very strange, but very good. So the last thing that we want to spend some time talking about is the call to action for all business leaders and what it means for leaders and the mindsets that they need to have to navigate through today's disruptive change and ultimately own the future. So Andy mentioned our organization was founded by the late, great Harvard Business School professor Clayton Christensen. I had the privilege in my career to call him various things throughout my time, 20 years of having a relationship with him. He was my professor, he was my boss, he was my co-author, he was my colleague, he was my mentor, he was most importantly my friend. And I was so thrilled to be able to participate in this magazine issue. Came out earlier this year, right as COVID-19 was taking off. It was Disruption 2020. The first mainstream article that Clay wrote was in 1995. That's when he brought the idea of disruptive innovation to the pages of the Harvard Business Review in an article that he wrote with Professor Joseph Bauer. And one of the big questions that I and my friend Michael Putz explored in the contribution we had in this issue is, why is it that 25 years after the idea of disruptive innovation is introduced, that you can still reference things like a Kodak moment, like Blockbuster, like some of the disruptions that are taking place today? And the argument that we put forward is the basic problem is that organizations are run by human beings, and human beings have blind spots and biases that lead to them systematically underestimating the threat of disruptive innovation and overestimating how difficult it is to respond. Leaders delude themselves, that's the polite way to say it. They lie to themselves is the less polite way to say it. These are a couple of the classic lies that have been discussed by Christensen. If you go back to The Innovator's Dilemma, his breakthrough bestseller, the essence of The Innovator's Dilemma is when disruption is afoot, when you listen to your best, most loyal, most profitable customers, they can lead you in the wrong direction. The lie you tell yourself is that our customers, our consumers will show us the way. You can also delude yourself by saying the data says that we are safe. Data reports yesterday, not tomorrow. It is a lagging, not a leading indicator. One of the examples we have in the article about this talks about Research in Motion, renamed BlackBerry. 2008, after the iPhone is introduced, after the Android operating system has come out, its CEO goes on a Canadian chat show and talks about how confident he feels, how good he feels about the position that Research in Motion is in. And if he looked at today's data, he had every reason to be confident. They had recently released their earnings that showed revenues had doubled in the prior fiscal year from $3 billion to $6 billion US dollars. From 2008 to 2011, those revenues would triple all the way up to almost 20 billion US dollars. The data said research in motion was safe, but of course it wasn't. That data misled leadership because in reality, there was a huge disruption taking place in the industry. Research in Motion's revenues over the next few years tumbled from 19 billion US dollars to less than 1 billion US dollars today. This is a persistent challenge that leaders face. Here's another thing that we have people say that is not true. People will say, well, I wish I could, but innovation is just too risky. So here's a little quick question for the chat window. I want you to think about a time when a big company innovated. They tried to do something and it failed. This is not a Kodak moment. This is not a company missing a big shift in their industry. This is a company betting on innovation and it being just a total flop. What do you think of? What comes to mind when you think of a big innovation flop? So the Dyson electric car, that's an interesting example. Woolworths and Masters. GE's GrowthWorks initiative, that's an interesting one too. Interesting, this is a good Australian moment of diversity. These are ones that I've not heard in other discussions. We've got Nokia's Symbian operating system. Katrina, Google Glass is one that I think plays globally. Sinclair C5, I have to say I do not know the Sinclair C5, but thank you for the contribution, John. I have something I've got to Google, not with my glasses. Bunnings venture to the UK. See if we get another one or two in there. There's a couple other classic ones that often come up. Google Glasses is one that often comes up. Debenhams in Australia. You get companies trying to expand to different countries. That sometimes works and sometimes doesn't. You know, Walmart has struggled for years in particular countries. Amazon has struggled for years in particular countries. Starbucks in Australia. One of the favorite little things, Andy and I have done a lot of work with a lot of the great organizations in Australia. I've been in Singapore for 10 years. Andy has been in Singapore for 9. And back in the good old days of not too long ago, we were very frequent visitors in Australia, and we hope that comes back before too long. But you know, one of the things that just surprised us is to learn that the McCafe concept for McDonald's actually originated in a franchise in Melbourne. And if you think about where would be the most hostile place in the world to introduce a new coffee concept, it would be Melbourne, but there you go. That's where the first McCafe was. So Katrina has Coke Stevia. The new Coke sometimes comes up in discussions as well. So, you know, we've got a lot of great examples here. One of the things that you notice about just about all of these is we can think about things like this, or Amazon's effort to do the Fire Phone, or Microsoft and its music platform. None of these are great stories, Corning going into optical networking, whatever, but none of them killed the companies that tried to do it. Because in almost all of these cases, the companies were big companies that placed a bet that didn't work out. And when you do that, what is your downside? Well, your downside is you write off the investment. It's worth nothing. What is the upside? Well, if you get it right, like Amazon with Amazon Web Services, there's almost no limit. The upside is uncapped. It's a whole new ecosystem. What happens in contrast when you don't innovate? Well, the upside in this case is capped. It is exactly 0. The downside is limitless because you can put your company out of business. So what is the risk? Is the risk innovating, or is the risk not innovating? That's a lie that people tell themselves, that innovation is risky. That's not the real risk. People will say our people just aren't up for the task. That's not true, because the people inside your organization are humans, and humans are naturally curious, creative, adaptable, ingenious. That's what we are as a species. That's why we're going to make it through COVID-19, and it'll be different, but we'll make it through. It isn't the fault of your people. It is the fault of your systems and structures. Those are the things that inhibit innovation. This is the core theme in the forthcoming book that Andy and I have with another Innosight colleague and the Chief Transformation Officer at DBS Bank here in Singapore. Any organization is capable of being really good at innovation if it thinks about it, if it acts in the right sort of way. And the other thing we have people say, and this ties back to the gold coins exercise, is that now isn't the right time. That is a lie. Now absolutely is the right time to think about the future, to bet on innovation, to go and create the next version of your organization. To overcome these lies, to realize the disruptive opportunities, to deflect the disruptive threats, leaders have to fundamentally up their game. If you look over my shoulder here, you will see a yellow colored book. That is a recently released book by our colleagues Mark Johnson and Josh Suskowitz called Lead from the Future. One of the ideas in that book is that leaders need to, as you see here, toggle between present forward thinking that's focused on all the things on the left side of this chart and future back thinking that's focused on all the things on the right side of the chart. We have a slightly different view. We of course agree that you need to have present forward and future back, but the slight difference is in the word toggle, because the word toggle implies sometimes you do this and sometimes you do that. The reality is leaders need to do both of these things, and they need to do them simultaneously. As the American author F. Scott Fitzgerald famously said, the test of a first-rate intelligence is the ability to hold two opposed ideas in the mind at the same time and still retain the ability to function. That is how you defeat the delusions of disruption. You have an adaptive mind that isn't either or, it is both and. If you look at the playbook that we have for big event disruptions, you see this coursing all the way through it. What does it take to really emerge stronger from the COVID-19 pandemic? Well, it starts fundamentally with courage. You have to have the courage to act and choose in the face of massive degrees of uncertainty. And then you need to think simultaneously about the future and about the present. As you think about the future, you are clarifying. What is your ambition? What is your purpose? What is the organization you really want to create? That then connects into choices that you're making. What are the things you're going to invest in? What are the things you're not going to invest in? To make this work, you need to have capacity. That might be financial capacity to go and put the right things in the right places. It might be capabilities in your organization. It might be a culture that allows you to make this work. You cannot do these things independently. You have to connect together the future ambition, today's choices and investments in capacity, and then you got to find a way to clearly communicate this to internal and external stakeholders. This is a really tough challenge. But again, this idea of adaptive thinking is something that runs through everything that leaders have to do in the face of today's tough times. So for example, if you want to develop a resilient and responsive culture, Andy, Paul, Natalie, and I have a whole book on that. We're not going to go into any of the details now just in the interest of time. But again, it requires this integrated adaptive mind where simultaneously you're thinking about systems and day-to-day habits. Simultaneously, you as a leader are doing and role modeling and enabling other people to do and role model. You are simultaneously thinking about the tactics you're going to follow and then the invisible nudges that will encourage people to do different things. You want to create an adaptive rapid response strategy. We know pretty well what the steps are to do this. If you look at strategy through uncertainty, there's a really good literature about the things you need to do. But again, it requires a leader that will approach it in a very particular way, where they're thinking simultaneously about the present and the future. Simultaneously, they've got data, but they're also willing to embrace guesses about the future because we can't know. And simultaneously, they're getting really specific, but pulling back to look and think in a broad sort of way. So let me end this section by having a story about what it looks like when you do this, and then I want to have a discussion going about how ready we as a group feel about rising up to the challenge of adaptive leadership. The person in the picture here is Helen Eden. In 2010, Helen Eden became the CEO of a not-for-profit in the United States called the Settlement Music School. Now, let me just make sure I'm transparent. Helen Eden is a longtime family friend. She's best friends with my older sister. I remember Helen from when I was about 5 years old. Helen, Juilliard-trained musician, takes over this not-for-profit in 2010. It's an iconic not-for-profit in the Philadelphia area. It's about 100 years old. Kevin Bacon was a student many, many years ago, and Helen made the decision to transform the organization. When she took over, the organization had 6 physical branches where they taught music classes, generally to children, generally in jazz and classical music. Helen drove what we would call a dual transformation at Settlement Music. Transformation A was repositioning those 6 centers. Today, they're not just teaching classes to children, they're also teaching classes to adults. One offering they have, for example, is called Adult Rock Band, where you will get together with a group in a 10-week course to learn how to play as a band. And you can keep doing it 10 week after 10 week. Not only does it allow people to reconnect with music, it allows them to meet new people, which is a really persistent problem for adults these days. In addition to having music courses for adults, they also have fused together music and therapy. So a lot of different things being done in the center. Transformation B is getting out of the center, finding ways to enable people in the Philadelphia and broader area to infuse music in everyday life, providing curricula to local schools, working with senior centers so that they can bring music to some of the people who are within the center. Very successful, dramatically changed the organization. Then COVID-19 comes. I hear from Helen in March of this year, and you might imagine the email I get is a cry for help or a despondent email, because the whole program is run through 6 physical centers. But that's not the way Helen is. Helen embodies what a leader needs to be right now. She is realistically optimistic. She understands what's going on. She knows the 6 centers have to close. She knows there's no physical classes for a period of time. But she's optimistic because she says, you know what? What I've always wanted to do is open up the 7th center, a fully virtual one. And now I've got the opportunity to do it. Today, you have 170 settlement teachers that are giving music lessons, not just to students in the local area, but because they're doing it virtually, they can expand beyond to other parts of the United States and even internationally. Helen is using this as a moment to fundamentally rethink what the future will look like, where she can merge together physical classes and virtual classes. And she's doing it from a position of optimism. She says, what role do we have to play in all of this? Our mission is to bring music to as many people as possible. Music lifts the spirits, and this is the sort of thing that we need to figure out how to bring to as many people as possible. She embodies an adaptive mindset that is able to deal with the present and think about the future, that is able to get down to the data and also be imaginative and have that spark and that smile that allows that music to go to as many people, as many places as possible. So let's have one last discussion before we close out our webinar. We're going to do one more walk the line activity. So let me open up this one on computer number 2 that has gone to sleep while I was telling that fun story. So if you remember the walk the line activity, again, you go to walktheline.innosight.com with the hashtag AUS behind it. I will open it up here. And this one, the question that we want to ask is, to what degree do you feel ready to tackle the challenges, you as an individual, to tackle the challenges of the next 12 to 24 months? 1, I'm not ready at all. 10, game on, I'm ready to go. And I'm hoping all the Innosight people are going to answer 10 to this. I'm going to put myself at 8. I am a realist, while optimistic. Okay, we've got some answers coming in. The black-hatted one is at 7. Charles with a star. We'll have to ask why there's a star behind it, unless that's my 14-year-old son, Charlie, that has decided to break into the webinar, which, you know, has happened before. I'll wait just a few more seconds to see if other people want to chime in, but we've got some good 8s and 10s here. Hey, we've got Michelle and John at 10. So Michelle and John, would love to have you say a little bit more about your optimism, brimming with optimism about being ready to tackle the challenges of the next 12 to 24 months. How about we have Michelle go first and then John?
I think we have the dual transformation strategy, as you know, Scott, you guys have worked very hard with us and we feel pretty set up and we've been executing against that. And I would say COVID's probably taken 12 months off our plans and just really accelerated it. So we're certainly seeing and feeling like the future is certainly something we can create and be in control of rather than be affected by. So I'm feeling pretty optimistic around our ability to execute and to reimagine the future.
Awesome. And Michelle, I know you've got to go to another meeting, so thank you for joining and thank you for contributing. John, you're up next.
Thank you.
Yeah, hi all. Yeah, I left the big corporate world of Ford Motor Company last year, about 12 months ago. Set up my own business because I believed I could impart all that great process knowledge and product development and innovation to the smaller guys, to the smaller people, the small businesses. I was about to launch when my website, got everything in place, COVID hit, and I thought it wasn't a great idea to come out as chief problem solver then. So I pivoted and I've put everything down into some toolkits, which I'm now close to launching on my website, which will be available. And it really hits that sort of third customer profile I've been aiming for, which are the little guys. And hopefully that'll bring those small businesses out of the dirt that they're currently in at the moment. So my vision is to help small businesses innovate, and I'm 100% committed, which reflects my 10 rating.
Fantastic. And of course, there's nothing like trying to launch a new business in the middle of a pandemic. My colleagues, or our colleagues, Mark and Josh, they launched a book in the middle of a pandemic. And that's not an ideal time along some dimensions to do it, but the world needs innovation. It needs entrepreneurs. It needs music. It needs thoughts. Now, I would say more than ever. So let's get maybe one more. I am curious to get the other extreme, Charles with the star. So Charles with the star, reveal yourself if you don't mind. And let's hear the Black Hat 7 on our distribution curve. Then we'll open it up for any last questions, and then we'll call it a webinar.
Good morning. Yes, Charles with the star. The reason for the star is it appeared that someone else was a Charles and I couldn't get that name, so I had to pivot and added a star. So I work in the biopharmaceutical industry, and while our industry entire future is based on innovation, the commercial model has probably been foundations were laid in the late 1980s, early 90s, and haven't really changed. So organizationally, the COVID-19 has provided a significant amount of opportunity, but I think the 7 is based on optimism around the opportunity, but with a bit of realism around our systems and processes, and having to take an external environment which considers the fax machine as an integral part of communication and data transfer as one of the sort of challenges you're running up against.
Yeah, it's a really interesting thing to think about. You know, I mentioned very briefly how one of the co-authors in the forthcoming book, Paul Cobbin, works at DBS Bank in Singapore, which is a pretty well-studied global transformation story where back in 2009, when Paul joined the bank, he remembers when he got a cab ride to go to his first day in the office, the cab driver said, DBS, damn bloody slow. And that was his reputation on the island, lowest customer satisfaction scores, very antiquated, very old school bank. And today it is widely recognized as a digital pioneer, one of the most innovative banks in the world. And the essence of the story is a cultural transformation where the habits of innovation have really become habits, where people on a day-to-day basis are more agile, more curious, more data-driven, more experimental, and so on. The thing that has been very interesting is that DBS has made a ton of progress in the last 10 or 11 years, but in the last few months, they've had a sudden acceleration because they have had to go digital. And people now have fully experienced what the possibility set is. Some of the new behaviors have been very locked in, and the toolkit that they have built around culture change has enabled them to really spot where are there soft signals of things that need to be addressed. As an example, one of the things that DBS really deeply believes is that psychological safety is something that enables innovation. I think a pretty well-known and well-understood phenomena. How do you know whether a team or group feels psychologically safe? Well, at least one sign could be the percent of people in a team, group, or department that are willing to turn on their video when they're part of a group discussion. Because if people don't turn on their video, that might indicate that they're just not willing to be fully present. It might indicate that there's a psychological safety issue in that area. An interesting hypothesis that you can then go and explore. And this idea that for us to fully realize the full innovation benefits, we need to think not just about the biopharmaceutical products that we introduce, but we have to think about the ways in which we work to make sure that we are curious and collaborative and experimental, so we really can quickly go and seize those opportunities and do everything that we can do. Great, thanks for the contribution, Charles, with the star. So we'll take just mindful of time, we promise we will end at, if not before time. We'll just pause here to see if there's any last question from anyone on our webinar.
Irene wants you to know that she feels psychologically safe, Scott.
Very good. That was not meant to be any comment about the people here. So that just so I'm very clear, these are people in work teams that are supposed to be working together for something like this. It's certainly totally acceptable for people to be on or off. So just so it's very clear, that was not meant to be a dig at people who were not on. Noel, do you have a question you'd like to?
A lot of when it comes to innovation, a lot of the thought leaders and a lot of the stuff I'm reading, they tend to talk about innovation as a 1 or a 0. It's either innovation or you're exploring or you're exploiting. When I think about it as more of a continuum, where you're along the new market, new technology capability axis. It's more of a continuum of uncertainty going out. I'd be interested in your comments on that relative to in the context of your your book on dual transformation and that.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a great question. So the idea of spectrum thinking just broadly, I think, is a really important thing for leaders right now. So if you look at Bob Johansen from the Institute for the Future, very good thinker. He's been a futurist for almost 50 years now, and actually he has been a futurist for 50 years, since 1968, 52 years. And he does rolling 10-year forecasts. So he's outlived many of his forecasts, which is unusual for a futurist. He actually goes and studies what he says and all that. But one of the big things that he sees as a future trend is the need to have spectrum thinking, to say it's not this or this, it's somewhere along this continuum here. And I think that is absolutely true for innovation, particularly as you look at what some of the digitally born platform companies are doing, people like Alibaba and Tencent and Grab in this market and Gojek and so on, because they're exploring and exploiting simultaneously all the time. And yes, sometimes you will have some separation, early stage R&D activity, et cetera, but I think increasingly organizations that can deal with that fluidity and realize it's not this or this, it's all mushed together, I think that really gives them competitive advantage. One of the things DBS has done, as an example, DBS has set up an innovation team. Their innovation team has one and only one mandate, and that mandate is thou shalt not innovate. Under no circumstance should they go introduce new products and services. They're there to enable, to catalyze, to spread innovation thinking all throughout the bank. So I absolutely agree. It needs to be spectrum thinking in many cases. That's hard, but that is something that I think organizations need to do.
Thank you.
So Anita, you've got your hand up. We'll take this as last question again. We will end at time. So, and I can talk super fast as you've seen. So Anita, you can have the last question of the day.
Sure. So hi, we work in the construction space. So hence when you asked the original question of how many people are going to be working from home, well, it's very hard to do installations and builds from a home environment. It's also an industry that's very old school, very reluctant for any form of change or innovation. Even the young people coming in their 20s and 30s really aren't up for change. So what elements or suggestions do you see that one can start to implement? Obviously, you can influence your own business, but your own business can't necessarily influence or heavily influence industry shift and industry change. I'm not sure how, so we're in the process of actually introducing a 4-day work week for all of our business, including our installers, which is being seen as highly controversial. But from a cost-benefit analysis for our business, it makes a lot of sense to do that. And our guys are very liking this idea of having some time, because physically it's not great on your body to be working 5 days a week. But then how do you influence industry to accept it and see it as the norm?
Yeah, that's a $1 trillion question in some cases, and one that doesn't have easy answers. But I would say generally, when we have dealt with complex system level industry related issues, there are two things that really help, three things that really help. Number one, have the dialogue around what you're doing be an inclusive dialogue. So it isn't we're doing this and industry come along, but have it really be something where different stakeholders are involved in co-creating what the future could look like. Because if they're involved in the co-creation, then you get naturally more buy-in related to it. I think the second thing, the communication aspect of this, I think cannot be understated. Communicate in as simple ways that you possibly can about benefits, about some of the good things that can come from it. I remember back in the day when I lived in the United States, I advised Procter & Gamble quite closely, and one of its mantras is write all advertising copy so someone who is in grade 3 can understand it. Not because people are dumb, but just because there's so much noise in the world, you got to really get to the essence. So simple communication. And then third, prove it. You try and figure out, as you have the inclusive discussions, what are the assumptions that people have that lead to them being hesitant, and find ways to pilot and prove and say, okay, you think that this is going to decrease productivity, or you think absenteeism is going to go up, whatever. We're going to go and run a pilot in a particular place and get the data, because our assumption is this won't happen. This isn't an I think or I believe fight. This is an I assume fight. We can run the experiment, and then we can have an honest discussion about it. So those are at least a couple thoughts on what is a very good question. And with that, Andy, I'll put the last slide up. Thank you all for the great participation and questions. For you to close out our webinar.
Sure, and conscious of time, so I'll make this the 1 minute close, not the longer version. But what you can see on the screen now is some further resources based on what we've been talking about today to help you. So we have a landing page for COVID-19 and a lot of thinking on that topic. In terms of Australia, there's 3 reports, all of which I think have been referenced today. The original 2019 research for the Transformation Champions, revisiting them this year. And then there's a deep dive into digital disruption of higher education. On the top right-hand side of the slide, you can see some books. The dual transformation concept, which we've alluded to today, is a 2017 book you can see there. Lead from the Future, that came out a few months ago. And that gets deeper into this idea of the adaptive mind, you know, this ability to live present forward, but think and act future back. So that's that book. And then Scott mentioned this, but the upcoming book in October this year, Eat, Sleep, Innovate, that Scott and I co-authored with Natalie, our colleague, and then Paul Cobban of DBS Bank. That's really about how you create innovative habits and behaviors that stick and scale in large organizations and ultimately unleash creativity. Scott's got another webinar coming up with Amantha Imber of Inventium about the transition back to the office and how not to stuff that up, which is on July 21st. But just to finish, you know, I began our session this morning sharing with you our purpose, which is, you know, Innosight, which is to empower forward-thinking organizations to navigate disruptive change and own the future. And we hope that through the conversations we've had today and the content we've shared with you, that you are now feeling more empowered to turn this period of profound uncertainty into opportunity. And so with that, you know, on behalf of Scott as well, thank you for your participation today and all the great comments and questions and discussions. Please do connect with us on LinkedIn or other channels, or reach out to us by email if you'd like to discuss anything further, or of course explore working with us. Thank you for your time.